My name is Tessa Hargrove. I was 29 years old when I walked into Callaway and Reed Wealth Management wearing a visitor badge, sitting in the same waiting room where I used to do my homework on the floor, waiting for my mother to finish her shift. That was 17 years ago. Back then, she was a file clerk. Now she was senior partner. And I was here because her assistant had called me, not her, to tell me I'd been removed from the family trust. The lobby hadn't changed much. Same marble floors, same oil painting of the original founder above the reception desk, same faint smell of coffee and leather and money that had followed me to childhood. What had changed was the name on the fourth floor directory. Where it used to read Hargrove, Administrative Staff, it now read Hargrove, Partner, Estate and Trust Division. She had climbed every rung of that place. I had watched her do it, believed in her while she did it, and somewhere along the way she had decided I was weight she no longer needed to carry. I didn't go upstairs. I sat in one of the lobby chairs, folded my hands in my lap, and waited, not for her, for the meeting I had scheduled 3 weeks ago with the firm's founding partner, a man she had never formally introduced me to because she'd told him, apparently, that she was an only child. She had a daughter. She just didn't mention me. The thing about being erased by your own mother is that it happens slowly. It doesn't arrive as a single blow. It comes in small revisions, a family photo where you're cropped to the edge, a holiday dinner where your chair gets moved to the side table with the kids you don't know, a conversation where she explains her absence to colleagues by saying you're finding yourself, as if 29 years of your life were a rough draft she hadn't approved yet. I had spent 6 years working in forensic accounting at a mid-sized firm in Pittsburgh. I was good at it. Patient, precise, the kind of person who could sit with a spreadsheet for 8 hours and find the 4-digit discrepancy that everybody else missed. My supervisor called me one of the best hires she'd ever made. I had a life. A small one, maybe. A 1-bedroom apartment, a cat named Biscuit, a Thursday night running group I joined to force myself to leave the office. But it was mine. Then my grandmother died. My mother's mother. A woman who had pressed $50 bills into my palm every birthday and called me her girl until the very end. She had left behind a modest estate, a house in Roanoke, a savings account, a small portfolio of municipal bonds. Nothing extravagant, but enough to matter, and enough apparently to fight over. I found out about the trust modification the way I found out about most things in my family, from someone who wasn't supposed to tell me. My aunt, my grandmother's younger sister, had called me from a gas station payphone because she didn't trust her own cell phone anymore, which tells you everything you need to know about what the last 6 months of that family had looked like. She said my name had been removed from the amended trust document, that the amendment had been filed 4 months ago before my grandmother even passed, that the sole beneficiary was now my mother, and that the witness signature on the document, the one certifying my grandmother's mental competency, belonged to a notary who had worked at Callaway and Reed for 11 years. I had spent the next 3 weeks doing what I do best. I sat down with documents. I read every page of the original trust, the amendment, the supporting filings. I pulled the notary's public records. I cross-referenced dates. And I found it. A 2-day window in which my grandmother had been hospitalized for a cardiac event, sedated and medically unable to provide meaningful consent to anything. The amendment had been dated inside that window. I didn't call a lawyer first. I called the firm's founding partner directly, a 73-year-old man named Walter Stanhope, who had built Callaway and Reed from a 2-person practice, and whose name was still on the letterhead because the board hadn't had the heart to take it down. I had found his direct line through my grandmother's old address book. She had kept it in her nightstand, a small, spiral-bound thing with a faded floral cover. His number was on the 3rd page, written in her looping cursive, beside the note, "Good man, honest." I told him I was Tessa Hargrove. I told him my grandmother was Margaret Lyle, that she had referred clients to his firm for 20 years, and that I had documentation suggesting a trust amendment had been executed during a period of medical incapacity. I was calm. I did not cry. I did not accuse. I'm Robert 7 years old. I told Tom what the dates said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come in. Thursday at 10. I told no one. The morning of the meeting, I wore the same blazer I'd worn to my last deposition. Navy, fitted, no nonsense. I put the folder of documents in my bag alongside my laptop and took the 6:15 bus from Pittsburgh to Richmond. I read through my notes twice on the way. By the time the bus pulled into the station, I had everything memorized. I didn't need the documents to be convincing. I needed them to be irrefutable. The lobby was where I always knew it would be. The marble, the oil painting, the smell, my mother's name on the fourth floor directory. Walter Stanhope came down to meet me himself. That surprised me. He was a small man, trim, with the kind of silver hair that looked like it had always been silver. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "You look like your grandmother." I had to breathe through that one. He led me to a conference room on the second floor, not upstairs, not near her office. He closed the door. His own attorney, a younger woman he introduced as Colleen, sat across from me with a yellow legal pad. I laid out everything, chronologically. The original trust documents, the amendment filing date, the hospital admission records I had requested through my grandmother's primary care physician, who had been kind enough to sign the release after I explained the situation, the notary's employment history at the firm. The 2-day window. Walter didn't interrupt. He read each document as I placed it on the table. When he got to the hospital admission record, he stopped. He looked at the date. He looked at the amendment. He set both papers down side by side and was quiet for a long time. "This notary still works here," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at Colleen. She was already writing. I had been in enough depositions to recognize the shift in a room when documentation moves from allegation to evidence. The air changes. People start writing faster and talking slower. That's what happened then. Colleen asked me methodical, precise questions. How I had obtained each document, whether I had the originals or copies, whether I had shared any of this with outside counsel. I answered everything directly. At no point did I say my mother's name out loud. I didn't need to. The document said it for me. We were 40 minutes into the meeting when the door opened. She had always known how to make an entrance. That was the thing about my mother. She had spent decades learning how rooms worked, how to walk into one and immediately understand the power dynamics, how to position herself before anyone else could. She was wearing charcoal gray, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, a coffee mug in one hand like she'd just stepped out of her perfectly normal Tuesday. She saw me. She stopped. I watched her face go through 4 different expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, something close to anger, and then, underneath all of it, something smaller and harder to name, something that looked for just a moment like knowing. "What is this?" she said, directing the question at Walter. "A meeting I scheduled," he said. "Please sit down. She has no standing here." "Whatever she's told you, please sit down," he said again. Same tone, slower. She sat. What followed was not a confrontation. That's what I want to make clear, because for a long time I thought that was what I wanted. I had imagined some version of this moment on the bus ride over, in the shower the week before, driving home from my grandmother's funeral when I was still too numb to cry. I had imagined raising my voice. I had imagined watching her face fall apart. I had imagined saying everything I'd never been allowed to say in that house. About the way she'd introduced me to her colleagues as my daughter, she's still figuring things out. About the Christmas she'd told my grandmother I couldn't make it home because I was busy, when the truth was she hadn't told me there was a gathering. About every slow, quiet revision she'd made to the story of my life until I was barely in it. But I didn't say any of that, because I had 12 documents in front of me and they were louder than anything I could have screamed. Walter laid out what the documents indicated. The timeline, the discrepancy, the questions about the notarization. He spoke carefully, the way someone speaks when they have already consulted their own ethics board and they know exactly how serious the words are before they say them. My mother tried several things. She said I had always been dramatic. She said my grandmother had been of sound mind. She said the dates were a clerical coincidence. She said I was doing this out of jealousy, which was rich, because I had genuinely not thought about the money in 3 weeks. I had thought about my grandmother's handwriting in that little address book. I had thought about good man, honest. I had thought about what it meant to be the kind of person someone trusted enough to write down. At some point, Colleen slid a document across the table to my mother. She looked at it. Her jaw moved. She set it face down. Walter said, I think it would be appropriate to take a short break." She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She looked at me then, really looked, for the first time since she'd walked in, and said, "You don't know what you've done." I said, "I know exactly what I've done." She left the room. I heard her heels on the marble all the way down the hall. Colleen brought me a glass of water. Walter sat back down across from me and folded his hands on the table and said, "I want you to know that none of this reflects the standards of this firm." He said it simply, without performance. I believed him. The formal investigation took 11 weeks. I wasn't involved in most of it. I had handed over my documentation and gone back to Pittsburgh and my spreadsheets and my Thursday running group and Biscuit, who was deeply uninterested in any of this. My aunt called me periodically from her cell phone this time. She said people were talking. I said let them. The notary resigned in week 4. The amendment was ruled invalid. The original trust documents were reinstated in full. I was not in Richmond when any of that happened. I found out by email from Colleen, who had started CCing me on official correspondence with a quiet consistency that I took as its own kind of statement. What I didn't expect was the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday in a plain envelope with no return address, but I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. She had always pressed too hard when she wrote. You could feel the grooves on the back of the page. It wasn't an apology. I want to be clear about that. It was 3 paragraphs of justification. She'd done what she thought was right. She'd had reasons I didn't understand. She'd been trying to protect what our grandmother built. She used the word protection 4 times. She used the word sorry 0 times. I read it twice. I put it back in the envelope. I didn't write back. I thought a lot about what I wanted from all of it. Not just the outcome, the legal resolution, the documents restored, but the deeper question of what I thought it would feel like to be seen. Because that's what this had always really been about. Not the money, not even the trust, but the accumulated weight of being someone's revision, of being the daughter who was still figuring things out year after year in a story she kept editing without telling me. I had thought that maybe if she had to sit across a table from what she'd done, she would finally see me. Actually, see me. Not as a problem to manage or a narrative to revise, but as a person she had made and then decided was inconvenient. She didn't. Or if she did, she couldn't say so. Maybe those were the same thing. But here is what I found on the other side of all of it. My grandmother had left me something that my mother hadn't known to remove because it wasn't in the trust documents at all. It was in a safe deposit box at a bank in Roanoke, listed in a handwritten codicil attached to the original trust, the kind of informal, personal document that doesn't always make it into the official filing but is legally valid in the state of Virginia when properly witnessed. My grandmother had done it that way on purpose. Her primary care physician had told me so when I called to thank him for the records. He said she had been a careful woman, that she had done things quietly when she needed to. Inside the box were 2 things. The first was a stack of cards I had sent her over the years. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, a few just because, cards from particularly hard years when I needed to feel connected to someone who loved me without conditions. She had kept all of them, rubber banded together in order of date. The second was a sealed envelope with my name on the front in her handwriting. Inside was a letter and a cashier's check. Not enormous, not life-changing in the way people talk about inheritances in movies, but significant. Enough to clear what was left of my student loans. Enough to give me a year of breathing room, and in the letter she explained that she had been watching me for a long time. That she saw what I did, the quiet, careful work of someone who finds the thing everyone else missed. That she was proud of me in a way she hadn't always known how to say out loud. That she hoped I would use whatever she left to build something that was entirely my own. I sat in the parking lot of that bank for 45 minutes. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there and let it settle. That someone had seen me, had been paying attention, had planned for my future in secret because she knew the plan could be undone if it wasn't kept quiet. She had known. That's what I keep coming back to. My grandmother had known what her own daughter was capable of, and she had prepared for it without saying a word, and she had loved me anyway, loudly and privately at the same time. I went back to Pittsburgh. I finished the quarter at work. In the spring, I put in notice at the firm. I took a month to travel, just regional travel, Virginia, the Carolinas, visiting people I'd let go to voicemail too many times. I spent a week in Roanoke, in my grandmother's house, which was in the middle of being sold, and I went through what was left of her things and kept what mattered and let the rest go. In September, I opened a small consulting practice: forensic accounting, estate document review, trust compliance. The work I had always done, but now for individuals and small families who couldn't afford the kind of firm my mother worked for. People who had documents that didn't add up. People who had been told to trust the paperwork without reading it. People who needed someone patient and precise and not easily intimidated by a conference room. My first client was a woman in her early 70s whose late husband's estate had been quietly restructured by a stepson she had never fully trusted. She came to me with a shoebox of papers and an apology for the mess. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. We sat at my kitchen table and I went through every document while she drank tea and her hands slowly stopped shaking. I found what she needed in the third folder. I still live in Pittsburgh. I still have Biscuit, who is older now and has strong opinions about where he sleeps. I still run on Thursdays, though the group has changed a few times over. I don't talk to my mother. That's not a dramatic statement. It's just a fact, the way some things simply settle into their final shape after enough time. She sent one more letter, 6 months after the first. Shorter this time. Still no apology. I could see the grooves of her pen on the back of the envelope even before I opened it. I put it in a drawer. I'll read it eventually. Or I won't. I haven't decided. What I know is this: she spent 29 years writing me out of the story. And I spent 11 weeks putting myself back in, not loudly, not with the kind of confrontation that makes for satisfying television but leaves you hollow afterward, just with documents, with dates, with the patience to sit in front of a spreadsheet until the 4-digit discrepancy makes itself known. My grandmother called me her girl until the very end. I used to think that was something small, the kind of thing you say to a grandchild out of habit or affection. But sitting in that bank parking lot with her letter in my hand, I understood what she had actually meant. She had been telling me, every time, that she saw me clearly. And she had been right. I've thought about cause and effect a lot since all of this happened. Not in any grand or abstract way, just in the quiet, practical sense that I apply to everything else. Actions leave evidence. Patterns repeat until something interrupts them. What a person does in secret doesn't disappear. It gets filed somewhere, and eventually someone patient enough comes along and reads the file. My mother had been rewriting the story for so long that I think she stopped noticing she was doing it. That's the thing about a slow erasure. It doesn't feel like a crime while it's happening. It feels like maintenance. A little adjustment here, a word changed there, a name left off a list. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to in a single moment and say, that's when it started. But the accumulation is its own kind of damage, and by the time I was sitting in that conference room with 12 documents in front of me, the weight of it had been building for nearly 30 years. What I keep returning to is this: she was capable of it because no one had ever made her account for it. Every time she revised the story just changed. I moved, or I was busy, or I was still figuring things out. The revision held because I let it hold. Not out of weakness. I want to be honest about that, but out of a kind of exhausted hope that if I gave it enough time, she would see me on her own. She didn't. And waiting for someone to choose to see you when they've already decided not to is its own slow erasure of yourself. What changed everything wasn't anger, it was precision. I did what I had always been trained to do. I sat down with the documents, I followed the dates, and I didn't look away from what they said. That's the part I want to hold on to, because it's easy to tell a story like this and make it about confrontation, about finally having your moment, about watching the person who hurt you have to face what they did. And there was something in that conference room, something real. When I watched her face move through those 4 expressions in 2 seconds and land on knowing, I won't pretend that didn't matter. But the part that actually changed my life wasn't the meeting. It was my grandmother's letter. It was the rubber-banded stack of birthday cards in date order in a safe deposit box in Roanoke. It was a woman who had been paying attention quietly and carefully for decades, who knew the risks well enough to plan around them, who loved me in a way that required no performance and left receipts. Integrity doesn't announce itself. That's what I've come to understand. My grandmother didn't call me the week before she died and tell me what she'd done. She just did it and trusted that I would find it, and I did. Walter Stanhope didn't know me from a legal document the first time I called him. But he heard what the dates said, and he showed up to the meeting, and he said, "Please sit down," with exactly the kind of steadiness that only comes from a person who has spent a lifetime doing the right thing, even when it cost him something. That's what I'm trying to build now. Not a practice, not a business. Those are just the shape of it. What I'm actually trying to build is a way of working that treats a shoebox of papers with the same seriousness as a filed brief. That says to someone whose hands are shaking, "There's nothing to apologize for. Let's just see what's here." That understands the difference between the people who write the documents and the people who are supposed to be protected by them. My mother is still out there. She still presses too hard when she writes. I still haven't decided what to do with the second letter. But I know who I am, and I know who saw me clearly, and I know that the work I do now came directly from learning, the hard way, at 29, in a bank parking lot, that being seen by one person who means it is worth more than a lifetime of revisions by someone who doesn't.